There's a sound the executioners of Paris have never heard. It's not a scream. It's not a plea for mercy. It's not the terrified silence of someone who knows they're about to die. It's singing. A religious hymn in Latin, sung by 16 female voices, walking toward the guillotine, as if they were walking toward an altar. And every time the blade falls, the singing continues. With one less voice, but it continues. The crowd doesn't know how to react. For months they've been celebrating executions, shouting insults, demanding more blood. But today they're silent. What they're witnessing doesn't make sense. They are the Carmelites of Compiègne, 16 cloistered nuns who hadn't left their convent in decades. And today, the revolution will kill them for it. One of them is named Constance, 29 years old, the youngest. She spent 9 years without leaving the convent. The first thing she sees of the outside world is the guillotine, and she's the first to climb the scaffold. Before walking toward the blade, Constance kneels before an older woman at the end of the line, the prioress, and asks, "Permission to die, mother?" The prioress caresses her face. "Go, my child." Constance kisses a small statue of the Virgin hidden in the prioress's hand, pushes the executioner aside, and walks toward the guillotine singing. She's the first. She won't be the last. What happens over the next hour will leave Paris silent. A city addicted to executions, stunned into silence by 16 women who refuse to stop singing. This is not legend. It happened on July 17th, 1794, at the bloodiest peak of the French Revolution. And 10 days later, Maximilien Robespierre, the most powerful man in France, the one who signed their death warrant, climbed those same steps. The man who built the guillotine's empire died beneath its blade. But what no one tells you is what happened before that scaffold. How 16 women who had never seen violence were dragged from their homes, stripped of everything they believed in, and told to renounce their faith or die. They chose to die, but not before making a vow that would haunt the revolution for centuries. This is Crown and Dagger, and this is what really happened. If these stories matter to you, support with a like and subscribe. By 1794, France had gone insane. What started as a revolution for liberty had become a machine of death. The promises of freedom and equality had drowned in blood. A man named Maximilien Robespierre controlled the Committee of Public Safety, and he saw enemies everywhere. Aristocrats hiding in attics, priests celebrating secret masses, anyone who didn't applaud loud enough at public executions. The solution was simple. Kill them all. Let God sort them out. Except Robespierre didn't believe in God. In less than a year, the Revolutionary Tribunal sent over 17,000 people to the guillotine. In Paris, executions happened daily, sometimes 30 people in a single afternoon. The executioners developed a rhythm: load, position, drop, next. They could kill a person every 2 minutes when they worked efficiently. The Place du Trône Renversé, where the Carmelites would die, executed 306 people in just 6 weeks. The ground was so saturated that pools of blood collected in the cobblestones. Neighbours filed formal complaints about the smell. The stench of death had become a public nuisance, but Robespierre had a special hatred for one institution, the Catholic Church. He saw it as an ally of the monarchy, a system that kept people stupid and obedient. So he launched a war against faith itself. Churches were closed or turned into temples of reason. Priests were forced to publicly renounce their vows or face the blade. Religious holidays were abolished. Even the calendar was changed to erase any trace of Christian influence. And wearing a religious habit, that was now a crime punishable by death. For the 16 Carmelites living in their quiet convent in Compiègne, 50 miles from Paris, this was a death sentence waiting to be signed. In September 1792, soldiers came and expelled them from their home. The nuns were forced into the streets, forbidden to wear their habits, forbidden to live together. But Mother Teresa of St. Augustine, their prioress, refused to let the community scatter. She found 4 small apartments in town where they could live in secret, continuing their prayers in whispers. And then she did something extraordinary. She gathered her sisters and made a proposal. Would they be willing to offer their lives as a sacrifice for France, not to seek death, but to accept it if it came, to offer their suffering so that the bloodshed might end? 2 of the older nuns hesitated. The idea seemed like madness, but Mother Teresa gave them time to pray. Within hours they returned, asking forgiveness for their fear. The community voted unanimously. From that day forward, every morning at 4 a.m., the 16 Carmelites renewed their offering. They prayed that if their deaths could purchase peace for France, God would accept the sacrifice. They didn't know when death would come. They only knew they were ready. For 2 years they waited, praying, hiding, watching as the terror consumed everyone around them. Then in June 1794, someone talked. June 21, 1794, soldiers broke down the door before dawn. Someone had informed on them, a neighbour, a shopkeeper, someone hungry for the reward the government paid for exposing hidden religious. 2 years of careful secrecy, destroyed by one whisper. The soldiers tore through everything. They found letters, prayer books, religious medals, a small statue of the Virgin, evidence that these women were still living as nuns. The charges: fanaticism and counter-revolutionary activity. In plain language, their crime was praying. The 16 sisters were taken to a former convent, converted into a prison. The irony was cruel. Nuns imprisoned in a building that once protected women just like them. But something strange happened behind those walls. Other prisoners noticed the Carmelites. In a place filled with despair, with people weeping and losing their minds with fear, these 16 women were different. They continued their prayers. They rose at 4 a.m. as they always had. They sang hymns in their cells. They comforted others who were terrified. English Benedictine nuns imprisoned in the same building later wrote about them. They seemed to be preparing for a wedding, not an execution. On July 12th, guards came to transport them to Paris for trial. There was a problem. Their civilian clothes were being washed, so they travelled in their religious habits, the very clothes that were now illegal. The journey took hours in open carts. Some in the crowd threw insults, but the Carmelites didn't hide or cower. They sang hymns the entire way, their voices carrying over the noise of the mob. By the time they reached Paris, they had already become something the revolution didn't know how to handle. The trial, cloistered, the trial was a joke. Everyone in that courtroom knew it. Revolutionary trials had no presumption of innocence, no real defense attorneys, no appeals, no chance. The verdict was decided before anyone spoke a word. The tribunal existed to provide a thin veneer of legality over what was simply state-sponsored murder. The prosecutor, Antoine Fouquier-Tinville, was a man who had sent hundreds to their deaths without losing a night's sleep. He had prosecuted Marie Antoinette. He had sent scientists, poets, and generals to the blade with the same indifference. To him, the 16 women standing before him were just another batch of names to cross off his list. He read the charges in a bored voice, like he was reading a grocery list. The Carmelites were accused of fanaticism, of hiding weapons, of supporting the monarchy, of corresponding with enemies of the Republic. The weapons charge would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so high. The only weapons found in their apartments were religious medals, pictures of saints and prayer books, rosaries, a small statue of the Virgin Mary, dangerous contraband in the eyes of the revolution. But one moment stood out, one exchange that witnesses remembered for years afterward. When Mother Teresa heard the word fanaticism, she interrupted the proceedings. The courtroom fell silent. Defendants didn't interrupt. Defendants stood quietly and accepted their fate. But Mother Teresa's voice was calm, almost curious. "Please explain what you mean by that word." Fouquier-Tinville looked at her like she was an insect that had dared to speak. "I mean your attachment to childish beliefs and foolish religious practices." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Everyone expected Mother Teresa to apologize, to beg, to explain herself. She smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a defiant smile. A peaceful smile, like someone who had just received confirmation of something they already knew. If believing in God was fanaticism, then yes, she was guilty, they all were, and they would die guilty. Gladly. The tribunal asked each nun the same question. Would you renounce your vows, deny your faith, and swear allegiance to the Republic? This was their last chance. The door was open. One word, one simple denial of everything they believed, and they could walk out of that courtroom alive. They could go back to their families. They could live. Constance, the youngest, answered first. No, Sister Marie of the Incarnation, who had been a Carmelite for 30 years. No, Sister Euphrasia, who had hesitated when Mother Teresa first proposed the vow of sacrifice. No, one by one, 16 times, the same answer. No, 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 no. The verdict, death. All 16? When the sentence was announced, the Carmelites didn't weep. They didn't collapse. They didn't curse the judges or beg for mercy. They renewed their religious vows right there in the courtroom, in front of the men who had just condemned them. The same vows they had taken years ago in the quiet of their convent. The same vows the revolution had tried to erase. Then they began to sing the Te Deum, a hymn of thanksgiving. They were thanking God for the privilege of dying for their faith. The guards stood frozen. Fouquier Tinville's face twisted with confusion. This wasn't supposed to happen. Prisoners didn't sing after being sentenced to death. Prisoners didn't thank anyone for anything. But no one stopped them. Perhaps even the revolutionaries sensed they were witnessing something beyond their understanding. Something that made their paperwork and their tribunals and their guillotine seem very, very small. July 17th, 1794. Late afternoon. The summer heat pressed down on Paris, and the smell at the Place du Trône Renversé was unbearable. Weeks of daily executions had soaked the ground with blood. The 16 Carmelites were loaded into carts with 24 other condemned prisoners. From the first moment, they were different. While others wept or sat frozen in shock, the nuns sang. For 3 hours through the streets of Paris, their voices never stopped. The Miserere, the Salve Regina, the Te Deum, ancient hymns that Paris hadn't heard in years, echoing off buildings that had forgotten what faith sounded like. People stopped to stare. Shopkeepers came out of their stores. Women leaned from windows. Children pointed and asked why those ladies were singing. Paris had seen thousands of prisoners carted to their deaths. They had never seen anyone who looked peaceful, who looked almost joyful. When the carts finally reached the square, the executioner Charles-Henri Sanson was waiting. He had killed thousands. He had seen every reaction a human being could have facing death: fear, rage, despair, defiance, collapse. He had never seen what he was about to witness. The nuns asked permission to sing one final hymn before the executions began. Sanson agreed. Maybe he was curious. Maybe even he felt something shift in that blood-soaked square. The Carmelites sang the Veni Creator Spiritus. Come, Holy Spirit, 16 voices rising in the summer air. Then they renewed their vows, one final time. Mother Teresa announced the order. Youngest to oldest? The youngest would die first. The oldest, including herself, would die last. This was deliberate. The older nuns would watch the younger ones go first, giving them strength with their presence until the very end. Constance stepped forward. 29 years old. 9 years in the convent. The first thing she ever saw of the world outside those walls was this square, this scaffold, this blade. She walked to Mother Teresa and knelt before her one final time. Permission to die, Mother. Mother Teresa looked at the young woman she had guided for years, the girl who had entered the convent as a teenager, who had given up everything for a life of prayer, who was now asking permission to give up her life itself. Go, my daughter. Constance kissed the tiny terracotta statue of the Virgin that Mother Teresa held hidden in her palm. She stood, walked toward the scaffold. The executioner's assistants moved to help her up the steps. She waved them away. She didn't need help. Constance climbed alone, positioned herself, looked at her sisters one last time, and kept singing until the blade fell. The crowd was silent. No cheers, no insults, nothing. The singing continued with 15 voices. Sister St. Louis stepped forward.